Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, coming to you direct from the beautiful Reedville neighborhood in the city of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so happy that you're joining us today. We're really happy that you subscribe to the show on iTunes, on Apple Podcast, on iHeartRadio, wherever you find your podcast. Thanks for subscribing. We're also very thankful that you're here today with two great guests, both coming to us from Pennsylvania. Jodi Stapler is here, and we're also joined by Phyl Campbell. Before Jodi and Phyl come in here to tell us about their books, I would love to take a minute to tell you about my latest book. It's called Love That I Matter to You. Love That I Matter to You. I wrote this book specifically for your kids to read to you. You know how there are certain books that your kids just love to read over and over and over again? And sometimes it makes you a little bit crazy. Well, you are going to love hearing your kids read this book to you over and over and over again, because it gives them a way to say thank you for all the wonderful time that you spend together. Love That I Matter to You. The ebook is available on Amazon, but check this out. You can get a free digital download by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Just sign up for our newsletter, and the book is yours for free. Free digital download of Love That I Matter to You at our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Joining us online right now from Lancaster in Pennsylvania. She is the author of a great children's book. She's also a podcaster, so I got to be on my A game here. Please welcome to the show the author of Pepper Miss Pepperoni, Jodi Stapler. Jodi, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you on the show and excited to learn a little bit more about Pepper Miss Pepperoni. Tell us about it, please.
Okay. Well, Pepper Miss Pepperoni is actually a book that's based on a true life story. Pepper was our dog. We adopted her, I think it was about 11 years ago. She was an older dog at the shelter, and we went in there knowing that we wanted an older dog. But the story is based on how she ended up at the shelter. Unfortunately, we had her for 11 years. She passed away this past summer right as the book was being finished up.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
At the age of 18. So
Wow.
She lived a really long life. But this is kind of, I wrote the story for my boys. I have 4 kids. When we got Pepper, I only had the 3 boys, and it was kind of more my way of explaining to them how she got to a shelter at her age. Mm-hmm. So that's really what the book is.
Cool. Well, can you tell us a little bit about how Pepper ended up at the shelter at, age
She
7?
She was like 7 years old.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So when we went in, we had looked at a younger, I like hounds. Uh-huh. So I looked at a younger beagle, and it was a little too hyper for me, especially with 3 boys. I didn't need something else that was jumping all over the place. So we asked to see the older beagle that was next to the younger one. And when you're always skeptical, about having an older dog. Why is the dog at the shelter? Mm-hmm. Was there a behavior issue? Anything like that? And they let me know that this older gentleman just brought her in, walked in with her on a rope, handed the rope over to the people at the counter, said, "I don't need a hunting dog," turned around and walked out. And they had to chase him down and say, "We need more information about this dog." And basically that was it. He had no more use for her. And if she would have lasted there, in my background, I actually grew up in show business, and I'm sure you know how it works when you are a performer. When you're not working, you have to have part-time jobs. Mm-hmm. So I worked at a shelter in my early 20s. So I knew that when dogs were older and they were not going to be adopted, oftentimes they get put down. Mm-hmm. It's very unfortunate. And I wanted this book to show that even though this dog was older and maybe not what everybody would want, because everybody thinks they want a puppy, that she was a good enough dog to have and needed to have a family of her own. So that's what the book's about.
Very cool. It's, I guess, ironic that right before I called you, I had to go and play with my beagle.
Okay.
He can last about 5 minutes, but otherwise he'd be howling right now, trying to get my attention.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny. We adopted our beagle. We adopted the amazing Augie from a shelter, and kind of similar circumstances. Knew really little about the dog. Didn't even know how old Augie was, and
Yeah.
And we had no idea what a beagle was all about. I've raised dogs, or I've had dogs in my family all my life, and never encountered anything like a beagle. It was a learning experience.
Yeah, for sure. Their nose is their brain. So if they get a scent of something, they will just take off. But we were lucky because Pepper, I don't know if she had been abused or what actually had gone on in her life, but she was afraid of any kind of noise. So if a gunshot went off and we live in the country.
Sure.
So in hunting season, you would hear that. She would cower. So I don't think she probably was the best hunting dog, but she was such a loyal, loving dog. She was my dog, and I miss her so much. She was the sweetest thing.
Well, that's a really great lesson for kids to learn, is that, unlike dogs, we don't throw away our older humans and
Right.
older people in our family.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's something. When I did work at the Humane shelter in my 20s, it was very sad. People would get married or they'd have a baby and hear this animal that they had as their pet all of a sudden wasn't important to them. So they would, oftentimes that's where a lot of the animals at the shelters come from. They come from families that just don't have time anymore, or they have a new baby and it's too stressful with a dog or a cat. And so oftentimes you find these dogs that are left there not knowing, not understanding what's happening to them. They've been in this loving family, and all of a sudden now their life is turned upside down. Mm-hmm. And then people come into the shelters and they walk through, and these dogs, first of all, some of them are very shy because they are not used to the situation. Others get hyper and excited every time they see someone walk through. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, people don't really get to see what the dog is like unless you actually get to love the dog a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And I guess the first question I have is, how did your initial audience react to it? How did your boys react to it?
Well, the boys loved the story. I actually, I didn't publish it for anybody else but my children years ago on Lulu. And I left it for them. And, as someone that's in the industry as far as performing and books and all that, I also have a publishing company. And I was publishing books for other people. And children's books, I love to create children's books with authors and finding the illustrators and putting it all together. And my youngest boy, who's now 14, said, "Why aren't you doing Pepper? Why aren't you doing the Pepper book?" And it's different when it's your own book. Mm-hmm. It's one thing when you're helping promote and helping someone else, but when it's your own book, it's a whole different, feeling about it. So I kind of pushed it on the back burner. And then this past year, I thought she was getting older. We could tell she was kind of, maybe not going to be with us for very much longer. And I felt like, well, maybe this is the time mm-hmm. to publish this. So that's what I did.
Interesting. Was this a way for you to kind of focus your grief at the knowledge that you'd be most likely losing Pepper?
Yeah, it probably was. She had gotten to the point where she couldn't walk up the stairs anymore, where she had been sleeping in bed with me, and or she couldn't make it to outside to go to the bathroom. Mm-hmm. So yeah, things were starting to go downhill, and it was just kind of one of those things I stuck in a drawer, for almost 11 years, and kind of just didn't really think about it. But yeah, it probably was a little bit of the grieving process.
I'm thinking that Pepper Miss Pepperoni would be a wonderful book to read with your kids, but also as a way to kind of open up and begin to start telling stories about important pets that were in the parent's life, important people that have come in and out of the parent's life, and also, talk about pets that may have been in the family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, parents, I remember my mom telling me about her little Cocker Spaniel that she had and a little bird that she had. And those kind of stories, even though they're just, they're not major traditional stories that parents tell, there's something about that to think of your mother or your father as a kid with a pet. It is a good thing to do that. And this would be a great way to bring those stories out. For sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love opportunities, and I always encourage parents to take as many opportunities as you can to give your kid a chance to see you when you were growing up and to share stories of the people that were important in your life. Because I think it helps the kids get to know you better and grow closer to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's weird for a child to think of their parents as not their parents, as a kid themselves. And sometimes it's good to remind them that you're a human being and you were there in their shoes as well. So definitely. Absolutely.
Well, you brought up a couple of things. I brought up the fact that you also host your own podcast. But before we talk about that, you are a publisher. What kind of books and what kind of authors are you bringing to the world?
Well, most of our books are children's stories. I believe you've had one of my authors on before, Allison T. Broderick,
Absolutely.
who writes the Healthy Habits series of Stanley Scotty's. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Stanley Samuel Scotty Snight, and then a new one, Marcy Mabel Molly McMahon. And then we have a couple books that are not children's books. We have a memoir of a dancer. We have a couple plays by an author. So we do a little bit of everything, but we really build it from the ground up. And that's, my whole plan, my whole idea for the publishing company was to give a voice to those that have stories to tell, but cannot get them to the big 5 publishing companies that are out there. But people really should get to hear these other stories. Just because you can't get through to the big publishing companies doesn't mean they don't have a story to tell.
Absolutely. And that is Willow Moon Publishing, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Now, I'm really, really curious. Tell us about your podcast.
Okay. Yeah. Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I have always been a performer. I do voiceovers, and a couple years ago, someone had hired me to do a trial of a brunch podcast. And it ended up that they decided not to do it. They went another way. But I decided, this was so much fun. I do love food. I'm a foodie. I love to do the podcast. So I decided just to keep going with it. And it's called Love You a Brunch Foodie Podcast. And I usually interview cookbook authors that are coming out, or restaurants, people in the food business and food industry. It comes out every Tuesday, and it's just a short, half an hour to an hour podcast, but I enjoy doing it, and it keeps me moving.
Awesome. Now, where can everybody find your publishing house, your podcast, and also Pepper Miss Pepperoni?
Okay. Well, let's see here. My publishing company, there's actually 2 websites for that. It's willowmoonpub.com or willow-moon-publishing.com. Either way will get you there. You can also find my publishing company on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Pepper Miss Pepperoni, you can find on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indie Publishing, anywhere that you can find a book, you can get Pepper Miss Pepperoni, as well as any of my other publishing company's books. My podcast, you can find on any podcast locations like iTunes, Spotify, whatever. It's loveyouabrunch.com. And you can find me on my own website, jodistapler.com, which also includes all of the publishing company and the podcasts and so forth.
Awesome. Now, this is going to sound like a silly question because you have a bazillion and one things going on right now anyways, but I'm always curious. Now that Pepper Miss Pepperoni is out there, are you working on another book yourself?
Well, it's always been the idea that I would have all these stories for Pepper, especially because then I had a daughter after my sons. It was Pepper Miss Pepperoni has a baby and that kind of stuff. But I do a gazillion things. I often say to people that, as a child, I was always doing nonstop new projects, and everybody would say, oh, she's so precocious. Like 10 years ago, I would have been diagnosed ADD. Mm-hmm. It's just who I am. I'm always on to new projects, but I keep the projects going with the other ones. So I'm a workaholic. But I do have a book I'm working on, that's not Pepper related. It'll be out for next Christmas. It's called Your Christmas Elf. And the basis is, the elf on the shelf thing is relatively new. But when I grew up, my mother used to keep us in good behavior by telling us that each child had their own elf and the elf would come and watch you. And in our minds, we really thought we saw the elf outside our window making sure we were being good. So, that's kind of where we're going with the story. Just, keeping it more fantasy and less commercial like the Elf on the Shelf one. Not to say that that's not an adorable idea, but yeah.
Well, my wife has turned me into her Elf on the Shelf, and we have, I think, 3 or 4 dozen silly hats that I wear, and she puts on me, and she takes all these pictures of me in weird places.
Awesome.
So, yes, it's a big hit on Facebook for 50 people.
Yeah.
Well, we would love to have you come back on to tell us about that book next year. In the meantime, we want to encourage everybody to check out willow-moon-publishing.com, where you can find out about Pepper Miss Pepperoni and also Love You a Brunch and all of the other great things that are happening in Jodi Stapler's life. You really do have to get some more energy and really, kind of get to work. Stop loafing around.
Right. I know. I can't help it. I'm just a couch potato.
Well, we've been talking today to the author of Pepper Miss Pepperoni. Check it out. A great book to share with your kids and add to your family library. Our guest today has been Jodi Stapler. Jodi, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, I'd like to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about my educational magic show. It's called We Choose Respect, and it uses magic, comedy, illusions, and storytelling to inspire your kids to always choose to be respectful of themselves and to each other. One of the things that educators really love is the fact that we address the issue of technology and always remembering to use technology respectfully, and again, respectfully of ourselves and of each other. I would really appreciate it if you could use the technology that you're listening to this podcast on to check out my website, jedlie.com, Jedlie, jedlie.com. Learn a little bit more about We Choose Respect, and then share that information with the folks at your neighborhood school. Maybe it's your kid's school. Maybe it's your grandkid's school. Maybe you're just a concerned citizen, and you want the kids in your neighborhood school to build a safe, caring, respectful learning environment. Please visit the website, jedlie.com, Jedlie, jedlie.com. I was just about to walk out of the York Book Expo here, and there was one person I wanted to speak to, and I finally found her, and here she is, Phyl Campbell. Phyl, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am wonderful, wonderful. This is a great event. How has it been for you?
It's been really good. I've been meeting a lot of people, a lot of kids. I bought a kid's book.
You bought a kid's book?
I bought a book written by a young person, and I'm excited because it is about all the ways that we can give back and be part of this continuing writing experience. So, yay!
I love that. And you've written a great middle grade book called Mermaid Overboard.
I have. Mermaid Overboard is the first book of the Mermaid's Revenge series. It's about a young girl who goes on what ends up being a pirate ship to try to avenge her dad's disappearance or death. And she learns all sorts of things, like that mermaids are real, and when you mess with them, they want revenge.
So they're not all cute and cuddly like in the Disney? No?
No,
Man.
no.
Oh, man. I was afraid of that.
The concept of mermaids in my series is that the mer are people who live underwater and are what we think of as mermaids because we're humans. But mermaid is a job description.
Oh.
It is women who have been transformed into mermaids because they were tied up and tossed overboard when men realized women on ships are bad luck and threw them overboard. Then they became mermaids, and they want revenge.
I don't blame them. I don't blame them, and I know I have a daughter who absolutely would want revenge. Someone tried to throw her overboard.
So that's it's the mermaid creation story, and it's a little dark, but it includes things like the Irish potato famine, the slave trade, and just the role of women on ships, and in this historical period of time, but also something that young people can relate to in the middle grades so that they can see where they can take responsibility in their lives and address the challenges that they face day after day.
Yeah, one of the things I love to ask authors about is, what kind of conversations can families have if they're reading your book together or co-reading it? And sometimes it's a bit of a struggle for me to think about what we can talk. But I'm just, you're talking, and there's some really great conversations. I mean, the potato famine in Ireland, the slave trade, just, our relationship with each other, how women should be treated and how we need to look at each other. What other kind of things do you think families can talk about?
Well, with Mermaid Overboard in particular, there are a lot of people who want power. There are very few people who have it. Most of those who have it want to keep it because not having power can be death. And I think that resonates in today's society, too. If you don't have the wealth, if you don't have the connections, if you don't have this, you might be in poverty, and that can relate to not having enough food, not having enough of what you need to live, which can also result in death.
Sure.
So to, really talk about equality. We have some race issues that come up in the book. We have gender issues that come up in the book. And all of those are great conversation topics for parents and kids.
And these conversations, the kids, if we're not involved in these conversations with our kids, they're hearing them because they're on the news, and those aren't conversations that I really want my kids to be involved with, because whatever side we're talking about, none of the grown-ups in these scenarios are being respectful or engaging in intelligent conversation. And so I think this is a great way for us to sit down and talk to our kids in a mature, respectful way.
Absolutely. In middle grade books, they are really kid focused. The kids sometimes see adults misbehaving, especially the girl on the pirate ship. She sees a lot of misbehaving adults and realizes they may be older, they may be grown up, but that doesn't mean that they're mature, that doesn't mean that they're respectful, that doesn't mean that they take their place as caretakers, but they're just takers. I'll seg from Mermaid Overboard to talking about amusement. It's another middle grade book that I have, but one of the nice things about amusement is that parents are actually part of the story. There are good adults to look up to and to get direction from. So even though the story is being controlled by the middle grade protagonists, the middle schoolers in the book, the adults are easier to follow and responsible caretakers rather than just takers.
Awesome. Now, where can folks find? Because we just touched on a couple of the books. There's a whole lot coming out of the mind of Phyl Campbell. Where can we find out more about all the different things that you're creating?
Well, I'm on Amazon. I have a website, www.phylcampbell.com. I have a Square store where all my books are and all the book tie-ins. So Mermaid's Revenge has a board game that ties in.
Cool.
Some of my things have crafts that go with them. And I have some other little surprises on my website and on my store. But then my books are all available on Amazon. If you are in York, they are at Ironic upstairs. So, talk to Steve and Dave and say, where are Phil's books? And they'll point you upstairs to my bookshelf.
Awesome. Check it out, Phyl Campbell. Phil, thanks so much for taking time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Love that. Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Stanetta Anthony. Hey, if you are the author of a great children's book, we would love to have you as a guest on the podcast. Being a guest gives you the opportunity to tell thousands of people about your fantastic children's book. And being a guest on the podcast is fun. It's easy, and it doesn't cost you a thing. Check it out today. Just go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the contact button. Let us know all about your great book. We'll let you know what you need to do next. Like I said, it's really easy. Hey, we want to thank our guest today, Jodi Stapler. We want to thank Phyl Campbell. And, of course, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.